Hey everyone, Vincenzo Calla here, and welcome to episode 39 of Let's Discuss Politics. Today, I'm glad to be joined by the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona, Heather Mcpherson. Thanks, Heather, for joining me today.
Of course. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's so great to have you here, and let's get this interview started. So, our first segment is called Heather's Story, where we'll talk a bit about who Heather is and her political history. So, first off, I wanted to ask you if you can tell me a bit about yourself, your story, and how you got your start in politics.
Yeah, so I wasn't really planning on being a politician. That wasn't part of my plan. I worked in international development. I actually worked at an Alberta-based organization and did a lot of work supporting other organizations that were doing international development around the world, foreign affairs, women's rights, sustainable development. Um, and ultimately I ended up spending quite a lot of time in Ottawa working on um, advocacy to the government, trying to get the government to be a little bit better at how they did support Canadian organizations that were working around the world. Um, and then Linda Duncan, the member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona before me, asked me in 2014, I guess, if I would consider running in the 2015 election in a riding that wasn't the riding I lived in Edmonton Centre. And I said, no, I don't really believe in representing ridings I don't live in. So I said no. And then when she decided that she was not going to seek re-election in 2019, she asked me again. And I said no. And she asked me again and a few more times. And, at one point, my husband and I were talking, and he just said, you really can't keep complaining about the way things are being done. You really can't keep saying that it needs to change without offering to be part of that change. So at that point, I thought, I'm gonna try it. My children were a little bit older, and I put my name forward. And 2019 was when I first got elected.
Yeah, and on that now, I wanted to ask you what ultimately made you decide to make that decision to step forward. I mean, stepping up and running for parliament is no little thing. So, what was something that made you decide that you were going to run, and why did you decide to eventually run for MP in Edmonton Strathcona?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, to be honest, I thought a lot about my daughter. I want her to know. I want all her friends to know. I want every young woman in this country to know that they belong at every decision making table. Um, our government currently has about 30% of the parliament as women. That's not representative of Canada. We want more women to step forward. We want more women in politics. It's hard. It's a difficult thing to do. But for me, I think that was the decision. I mean, I looked at my daughter. I thought, how can I say to her that she belongs at every table when I'm not willing to step up and try to sit at those tables as well.
And I wanted to ask you before we go on to the next segment that your election in 2019 was something that a lot of people looked at because you were the only non-conservative that won in Alberta in that election. The whole province went blue, but you kept your part orange and you won. So how was that for 2 years? Now there's a few others in Alberta, but how was that in 2019 being the only NDP and the only non-conservative to win in Alberta?
Well, yeah, and even more so, it was all of the prairies almost like it was Winnipeg to
Yeah.
the Rocky Mountains, the Saskatchewan as well. Um, you know, and it's a huge responsibility because, as you will know, our electoral system does not reflect the will of voters very well. Our first past the post system doesn't actually work all that well, and in Alberta, about 30 to 40% of Albertans voted for a progressive representative and didn't get that. So for me, I felt very responsible for presenting those things. I felt like I had to think of the whole province. I didn't just have to think of my riding. It really informed some of the work I did. I worked a lot on coal mining in the Eastern Slopes and the Rocky Mountains. I still am very, very concerned about Wood Buffalo National Park in Northern Alberta. I'm very concerned about the oil sands. How we're looking at a job strategy for Alberta. All of these things that are not necessarily Edmonton Strathcona issues, but they're very important to progressives in Alberta. And I did feel like I had to represent those interests. And of course, it's always when you're the only one. There is also a bit of a target on your back, right? Like you do. You do get a lot more of the vitriol. When you think about when I was elected, there was a lot of controversy. You know, COVID just started. We were going through a really terrible time in this country, and so we did get a lot of vitriol pointed towards me, and that's difficult as well.
Well, let's talk now a bit about your time since 2019 being elected and serving as an elected official. So, first off, I wanted to ask you locally, what has been your favorite part about serving Edmonton Strathcona as their MP over the past few years now?
Favorite favorite achievement is a little different. I mean, I talked a little bit about the coal mining, and I do have to say, I brought forward a private member's bill on protecting the Rocky Mountains from coal mining. And the minister phoned me one morning, actually in June, and said that he'd read my private member's bill. He was taking that and he was putting it into actual practice, into policy. And for me, that was this moment where, I wasn't high up on the lottery that we have to determine who gets to bring the private member's business forward. So I wasn't hopeful that this would get. I didn't have a way to make this law. And the fact that the minister, in fact, took that and put that into the policy for the government of Canada, for me, just felt. I mean, it felt like $1 million. It felt like $1 million to be able to know that I had been able to make that change. In terms of the things I like best about this job, I mean, it's the biggest honor in the world to get to represent the people of Edmonton Strathcona. It's fascinating work. It's important work. I'm the foreign affairs critic, so of course now in the state of the world, the changing dynamics of our multipolar world, the war in Ukraine, the challenges that we're seeing in other parts of the world, it's pretty interesting work and it feels important. And I hope I can bring a progressive lens to that. I hope I can move the government so that they act in a way that is in line with some of the values that I see.
So locally now, I kind of messed up the way I asked my questions before, but it's okay. So usually I start locally and then I go to Parliament, but today we started with Parliament and now locally, what is it like serving the people specifically in Edmonton Strathcona? And what's your favorite part about being their local MP and in around there and being able to represent them in Ottawa, which is pretty far from your riding?
Yeah, I mean, what the worst part's the commute. There's no doubt about that, particularly now. But the best part, I mean, Edmonton Strathcona is this really cool riding. Of course, we have the Fringe Festival, we have the Edmonton Folk Festival. We have the arts. This is the arts community. This is the theater community. The music community is all based in my riding. White Ave. We have Pride Corner in our riding. All these things that are that it's a pretty cool riding to represent. We also an incredibly active Ukrainian diaspora community, other diaspora communities that we work with, that I think for me that's the best part. I mean, the people of Edmonton Strathcona are pretty fantastic. The community is pretty fantastic. There's a reason that we have always been one of the most progressive ridings in the country. There's a reason why people in this riding recognize that taking care of each other is really important. And so I love representing Edmonton Strathcona. Plus we have a really great off-leash park, which I don't know if you can tell, but my dog is demanding that I pet her at the moment. So
Well,
super
that's working at home.
important.
Working at home, that's been the story of all of our lives over the past few years. But yeah, and on the commute, I had Rachel Blaney, your colleague, on a couple weeks ago, actually a couple months ago now, and we talked about that commute. She's from BC, so I I can imagine the commute, and I'm sure coming back and forth to Ottawa is no small thing, but you get to serve your community in Ottawa, and it's such a great way to do that.
That's true. Yeah, it's really cool.
The last segment of the show now is called The World of Politics Around Us, where we'll talk a bit about this world of politics that surrounds us. So first off, I wanted to ask you, who is or who was another politician that inspires you?
Wow. I come from a long line of politicians that inspire me, to be honest. Linda Duncan and going ahead of me was of course one of them. But I have to say Paul Dewar. Paul Dewar was of course a New Democrat from Ottawa. Was one of the my predecessors with regards to foreign affairs. I often go back and listen to things Paul said. Of course, I'm devastated that we lost him so early, and I didn't get an opportunity to serve with him. But I would say Paul Duro is one of those people that I aspire to having the ethics, the strength, the voice that he had, that he brought to all of his work.
And finally now, this question is the one that takes the most time, so we'll spend some time on it. And it's, what do you think is an issue or some issues that you would like to focus on more and that should generally be focused on more?
Yeah, I have a lot of, I mean, it's one of these things where when you're a parliamentarian, you get to think about what are those laws that Canada needs, what are the pieces that we need to be focusing on. So it is our job, and so we get to really think about it. And it always, you open one door and there's five more doors behind it, I guess. So I mean, I'm an Albertan. I think that our economy is changing. I think that as we look to the future, I want to see a vibrant Alberta, where folks have jobs, the family sustaining jobs, where folks have a healthy climate to live in. That's going to take a lot of effort. That's going to take a lot of work. And I have to say, from my perspective, the country of Canada has really benefited from Alberta's wealth, has really benefited from Alberta workers. And I think that there is coming very quickly a time for us to also support Alberta. I don't think oil and gas is going to disappear, but I do think that energy pie has to change. We do have a climate crisis happening in this country. So how that happens is a massive preoccupation of mine. I also think, though, that we look at Canada's role in the world, and it's very diminished. I am a foreign affairs critic, and so I would like to see Canada have a more fair way of dealing with other countries. I think that we could be doing much more if we used a human rights lens, if we used a lens based on peace as we deal with other countries. I'm proud of the support that Canada's been able to provide to Ukraine. I think there's much more we could do, but I also think that commitment to supporting other countries isn't always seen. We pick and choose which countries we support, and I don't think that's the way our foreign affairs should work. And then there's pieces of legislation like making sure that the changes that we made to the Rocky Mountain, to protecting the Rocky Mountains with regards to coal mining, well, it's in policy, but we could very easily get a different government. So I need to make sure that that's actually put into law. If we get a government that wants to peel back environmental protections, I need to make sure that that's put in law. I'm going to be tabling in March a piece of legislation on ADHD. This is what might seem like a really small action, but we don't have a strategy for identifying and treating ADHD in children in this country. And we know the impacts of that, if we don't treat it, are massive, and if we do treat it, are minimal. So these are things that we can work on. So there's a lot that I'd like to see. If I was prime minister, there'd be a lot of things I'd be able to move on pretty quick. But using the channels I have as a parliamentarian, there's lots of things that I want to prioritize, that I want to work on, that I want to hold the government account on.
Well, definitely there's just so much happening right now, and looking at all the issues that are coming to us head on just in the past 2-3 years, especially, it's just there's so much happening and so much that everybody wants to do, and getting through it and working in parliament and working with colleagues both in your party and outside of your party to try and get the best things done is just so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a great point you make on working within our party and without. We have a minority government, and I like minority governments because it means that I do have to work with members of other parties. Like, we do all have to work together to get things done, and I think that's really important.
And just a great way to work in parliament, and a great way to talk about ending on our interview on. So thank you. So that's all for today. Thanks, Heather, so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me. This was really fun.
Well, it was so great having you. And if you like this interview, make sure to go check out my other interview with Heather on YouTube for top 10. If you're watching this at the date of the premiere, it's going to be coming out on Friday. To stay updated, make sure to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at VC Productions 25. Check out my website, vincenzocalla.com, and make sure to like, subscribe, and choose to get notifications here on YouTube. Let's Discuss Politics is a VCalla production. So until the next video, I'm Vincenzo Calla, signing out.